Welcome back to the studio. You're watching Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Shona Bhattacharya. Let's take a look at our top stories in this edition. And dozens are feared dead and injured after an overcharged train derailed in Cameroon. Angry families say authorities are too slow in providing details. Pulling out of the International Criminal Court, South Africa has notified The Hague it is withdrawing due to a conflict over diplomatic immunity laws. And the UN accuses the DRC of hampering its investigation into the deadly protests that rocked the capital last month. According to its preliminary report, 48 people were killed in clashes with police. In Cameroon, dozens are feared dead and hundreds are injured after a passenger train derailed this Friday. The overloaded train was carrying 1,300 people instead of the usual 600, according to rail officials. The accident took place in Iseka, about 2 hours from Yaoundé, the capital, as the train was on its way to Douala, Cameroon's other major city. Anxious families say authorities are slow in providing information.
Camrail, the train company, isn't telling us anything. The families of the victims aren't being taken care of. They tell us we'll know more in a few hours. This isn't normal. We're asking the Cameroonian government to act. This isn't right. They can't stick two trains together like that when it's more than acceptable capacity.
We asked them when did the accident happen. They answered it had just happened, but it happened hours ago. We still don't have the list of passengers or of the dead and wounded.
France 24's correspondent Zigutu Chaya reported earlier from Yaoundé.
The company has requested actually that those whose relatives or friends are concerned with this train accident should exercise some patience while they get more information and then publish a comprehensive list of the victims that relatives and friends are desperately waiting to know. It's terribly affecting transport in the region because, first of all, very late, over early this morning, there was the road cut off at the level of Matombe, about close to 100 kilometers away from Yaoundé. So it's difficult for people in Douala to travel to Yaoundé to sell, to do business, and in short, Yaoundé, Douala, to and fro. And so it's actually affecting, it's surely going to affect business and the Cameroon economy this short while.
Accusing DR Congo's government of hampering a UN investigation, the United Nations Joint Office for Human Rights has released a preliminary report on the 2 days of violence that rocked the capital Kinshasa in September. It says senior officials were instructed to refuse investigators access to detention centers and official registers that were tallying the dead and injured. The report claims 48 people were killed in clashes with police. Laurent Berstetcher has the story.
Accused of human rights violations, a United Nations report says security forces shot, burnt, beat, and hacked dozens of civilians to death during last month's opposition protests in Kinshasa.
The High Commissioner has expressed deep concern at the mounting number of these very serious human rights violations by state security officers in recent months. There were at least 422 victims of human rights violations.
The organization says at least 48 of the 53 reported deaths were caused by police officers. Another 143 people were injured and almost 300 were the target of arbitrary arrests, including 8 journalists. The UN also accuses the government of hiring and arming groups of thugs to attack protesters and says its investigation was impeded by state officials. Kinshasa residents welcomed the reports but expressed concern it wouldn't be enough to put an end to the violence.
I applaud the report, but I'm also worried. Sanctions are not enough. Many of our citizens are still being mistreated and chased by police. They get kidnapped all the time. That's what worries me.
The deadly clashes took place in Kinshasa last month. The opposition had called for massive protests to put pressure on President Joseph Kabila and ask him to step down at the end of his second term.
South Africa wants out. The government of President Jacob Zuma announced it's withdrawing from the International Criminal Court in The Hague The decision will come into effect in a year. South Africa says membership in the court conflicted with its diplomatic immunity laws, and many on the continent feel targeted by the ICC. Since it was created, all but one of the court's 10 investigations have been based in Africa. Earlier this week, Burundi's president signed a decree to leave the ICC as well. France 24 correspondent Aisha Ismail joined us earlier from Cape Town. She explained why this decision is coming now.
South Africa was talking about leaving the ICC last year already, and this came about when Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir arrived in South Africa to attend an African Union summit. And as a member of the ICC and a signatory to the Rome Statute, South Africa had an obligation and a duty and a responsibility to arrest al-Bashir and hand him over to the ICC. South Africa did not do this, saying that he was here by the invitation and at the invitation of the African Union, and therefore enjoyed diplomatic immunity. They then allowed him to leave South Africa without arresting him. This caused a major diplomatic row internationally as well as in South Africa, where human rights organizations took the South African government to court, saying that South Africa had an obligation to arrest him and hand him over to the ICC. Now, it's interesting to note that 2 South African courts ruled against the South African government, saying that the South African government had acted unlawfully by not sticking to its obligation to arrest him and hand him over to the ICC. So this process started last year already, and a letter was sent to the United Nations this week stating South Africa's intention to withdraw from the ICC.
Burkina Faso security forces foiled a coup attempt earlier this month. That's according to the Interior Minister. He says about 30 former members of the elite Presidential Guard were planning an attack on the Presidential Palace, army barracks, and a prison starting at midnight on October 8th. The Interior Minister says those former Guard members were supporters of former President Blaise Compaoré, who was ousted from power 2 years ago. Bad odors and toxic chemicals in plain sight in Bamako, the Malian capital. Trash dumps are growing at an alarming rate, and in one neighborhood in particular, trash from several districts pile up. France 24's correspondent on the ground brings you this report on the health consequences residents are facing and what they're doing to raise awareness.
Every morning the trash carts arrive with their loads. But in recent days, the police have been attending the dump site at Medina Koura in central Bamako. It's an environmental health crime, say neighbours. Tons of waste are piled here, just a few steps from market poultry sellers and immediately adjacent to a primary school.
We have written to the mayors of all the neighborhoods. We have told them that this dump at Medina Koura is filled. We cannot take it anymore. We have told the mayors to deal with their own garbage and that Medina Koura will not become the trash can for the whole of Bamako.
More than 2,300 children study here. The school's management is concerned.
The smell is toxic. Everyone knows it. It's bad for the children.
The district authorities blame budget shortages. They claim tax revenue is just not keeping up with the waste output of a city with an ever-growing population.
On paper, Bamako was supposed to have 30 transitional garbage dumps, but we have only 12 official ones and many informal ones, making a total of about 52. The strategy has recently been reviewed in favor of structuring waste treatment in Bamako.
The population of Mali's capital is projected to triple in the next 15 years to 7.5 million. That means 3 times as much rubbish, far in excess of the capacity of the Medina Koura depot or of this one in the Lafiabougou neighborhood.
The Kingdom of Benin has a new monarch. Iwari II has been inaugurated. He is the new Oba, or king. 100,000 people came to get a glimpse before an elaborate coronation ceremony. The Kingdom of Benin, now located in modern-day Nigeria, is one of Africa's oldest and most prestigious kingdoms. It boasted vast wealth and sophisticated urban planning and flourished from around the 13th century until the invasion of the British. hundreds of years later. And that's it for this edition. There's more news coming up. Don't stay with us on France.